She stood in a room where 3 men had died and knew it. The air still smelled like money and something colder underneath it. Across the desk sat a man in a black suit who had never once, in his entire adult life, said the words, "I love you," and meant them. Imani Reeves had come to ask him for the one thing money couldn't buy and fear couldn't force. "Marry my sister," she said. "She has 6 months to live. Please, give her a wedding before she dies." The man called Sue didn't blink. "And what?" he asked quietly. "Do you think you're offering me in return?" She had no answer. She only had a dying sister and 30 days and nothing left to lose. Before we go any further, if stories like this one, about love that shouldn't exist but somehow does anyway, hit you right in the chest, hit that subscribe button right now, because you do not want to miss where this one goes. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever done something impossible for someone you loved? I want to hear it. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Imani Reeves had 2 rules she lived her whole life by. Rule 1. Never let anyone see you cry in public, because tears made people think you needed saving, and Imani had learned a long time ago that nobody was coming to save the Reeves girls but each other. Rule 2. Naomi came first. Always. No exceptions. She'd been 8 years old the first time she made that second rule a promise, instead of just a feeling. Their mother had died in a car accident on a rain-slicked road outside the city, and their father had disappeared into a bottle, and then out of their lives completely within a year. It was Grandma Ruth who took them in, a small woman with a spine like rebar, who ran a flower shop 3 blocks from the projects, and believed, with the kind of conviction that could move mountains, that beauty was not a luxury, it was medicine. "Grief needs somewhere to go," Grandma Ruth used to say, snipping thorns off a rose stem, with the same hands that had buried her own husband and her own daughter. "Give it flowers, and it'll grow into something you can stand to look at." Naomi, older by 2 years, had inherited their mother's laugh, a big, unguarded, head-tilted back laugh that made strangers on the street smile without knowing why. Imani had inherited something quieter. She noticed things. She noticed when Naomi's laugh got smaller. She noticed, months before anyone said a word out loud, that her sister was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. She was 24 when the doctor said the words restrictive cardiomyopathy in a voice that was trying so hard to be gentle, it almost sounded rehearsed. "Her heart is stiffening," Dr. Alvarez explained, sliding a folder across the desk like it was something that might bite. "It's not pumping the way it should. We can manage the symptoms, but without a transplant, and she's not currently a strong candidate, we're looking at months. Maybe a year, if we're lucky." Imani remembered gripping the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles went pale, remembered thinking, absurdly, that the folder looked too thin to hold something that was about to end her whole world. Naomi took the news the way she took everything, with a kind of stubborn grace that made Imani want to scream and hug her at the same time. "Well," Naomi said that night, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a mug of chamomile tea going cold in her hands, "I guess I'd better make the time count." She made a list. Of course she made a list. Naomi had been making lists her whole life, grocery lists and birthday lists, and one day when I'm rich lists. This one she wrote on the back of an old receipt, because she said fancy paper would make it feel too final. "Things I want before I go," it said at the top, in her looping cursive. 1. See the ocean at night, not just during the day. 2. Eat a real croissant in Paris, even a bad one. 3. Forgive Dad. Working on it. 4. Fall in love. Really fall. Even if it's just once. Even if it's short. Imani had read that 4th line, and felt something crack open in her chest, that never fully closed again. Have you ever loved someone so much, that their unfinished wishes became your responsibility? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if you felt what Imani was about to feel, because it changes a person. Because Naomi Reeves had never been in love. Not really. She'd had a boyfriend in college who cheated, and a 2-month situationship after that which fizzled into nothing. And after her diagnosis, the dating apps she opened out of habit, filled with men who vanished the second she mentioned hospitals. 24 years old, and she had never once had someone look at her like she was the only person in the room. Imani decided, somewhere in the weeks that followed, that this was the one wish on that list she could actually make happen. She couldn't conjure Paris out of thin air on a florist's salary. She couldn't undo their father's decade of silence. But love, she thought, with the particular delusion of a person who has run out of good options. Love was just a matter of finding the right person and asking. She had no idea how wrong, and how right, that idea was about to turn out to be. The trouble was, the Reeves family flower shop, Ruth's garden, the only thing Grandma Ruth had left them besides each other, was drowning. Naomi's treatments weren't covered by insurance the way they should have been. There were appeals and denials, and appeals again, and somewhere in the chaos, Imani had taken out a loan from a man who did not file paperwork with any bank. She'd been desperate, and it had seemed like the only door still open. Now that door had a price, and the price had gone up twice, and the man collecting it had stopped being polite about it. "You're 3 weeks late, Miss Reeves," he'd said the last time, standing too close to the register in a shop that smelled like lilies and fear. "Mr. Sir doesn't like late." That was the first time Imani heard the name. She learned, in the frantic research that followed, the kind you do at 2 a.m. with shaking hands, that Sue wasn't just some collector. He was the organization the collector worked for. 7 Rivers Import and Trade, on paper, was a shipping company with offices downtown and a reputation for punctuality. Underneath that paper, everyone in certain circles knew it was something else entirely, the kind of operation that moved things nobody asked too many questions about, and settled its debts with a precision that had made 3 separate rival operations quietly disappear from the city over the past decade. Nobody knew much about the man himself. No photographs online, no interviews, just a name that made grown men's voices drop when they said it. Imani should have been terrified. She was terrified. But somewhere underneath the terror was a colder, more practical thought that she couldn't shake once it arrived. A man that powerful could make anything happen. Even, maybe, a wedding for a dying girl who'd never been loved. It was insane. She knew it was insane, even as she was doing it. The way you know a decision is reckless, and do it anyway, because the alternative, doing nothing, is somehow worse. She showed up at the 7 Rivers offices on a Tuesday, in a thrift store blazer she'd ironed twice, rehearsing a speech in her head that fell apart the second Minho Beck, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, and a jaw that suggested he'd broken a few of his own knuckles in his time, looked her over in the lobby, and said, "You don't look like someone here to make a payment." "I'm not," Imani said. "I need to speak to Mr. Su, personally." Minho had laughed, not cruelly, more like he was genuinely charmed by the audacity. "Nobody speaks to him personally, sweetheart. That's kind of the point of him." "Tell him," Imani said, and her voice only shook a little, "that the woman who owes him for Ruth's garden isn't here about the debt. Tell him, I have a different kind of proposal." Something about the word proposal must have snagged Minho's curiosity, because 20 minutes later, against every instinct in his body, he was walking her up to the top floor. The office at the top of the 7 Rivers building didn't look like she expected. No trophies of violence, no ostentatious wealth. Just clean lines, a wall of glass overlooking the harbor, and a man behind a black desk who didn't look up from the papers he was reading when she walked in. Jaewon Soo was younger than she'd pictured, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of stillness that made a room feel smaller. When he finally lifted his eyes to her, they were dark and unreadable, and Imani had the distinct, unsettling sense of being assessed, the way you'd assess a stranger's dog before deciding whether it was safe to reach out your hand. "You're behind on payments," he said. Not a question. "I know. And yet here you are, asking for a meeting instead of bringing cash." A faint, humorless curve, touched the corner of his mouth. Bold. Or stupid. We'll see which. Imani made herself stand up straight. She thought about Naomi's list, about that fourth line in that looping cursive handwriting, and something in her steadied. My sister is dying, she said. Restrictive cardiomyopathy, maybe 6 months, if the doctors are being generous. She has a list of things she wants before she goes, and I can't give her most of them. I can't give her Paris. I can't bring our father back to make things right between them. But there's one thing on that list I think I actually can give her, if the right person says yes. And what's that? She wants to fall in love. Really fall. Even if it's short. Imani's voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it. Hated that Rule 1 had just broken in front of a stranger, but she pushed through anyway. She's never had that. Not once. Not really. In 24 years. And I know how that sounds. I know you don't know her. I know you have no reason to care. But I've heard what people say about you. That you get things done. That when you decide something, it happens, no matter what's in the way. Jaewon's expression hadn't moved, but something in his eyes had sharpened. You want me, he said slowly, like he was making sure he understood the shape of the madness in front of him. To marry a dying woman I have never met. Yes. Why would I do that? Because I'll forgive the debt. No, I know that's not enough. I know money isn't the point for a man like you. Because, Imani stopped, and for the first time since she'd walked in, her composure genuinely faltered. Because I am asking you, one human being to another, to give a dying woman something real, before she runs out of time. I don't have anything else to offer you. I have nothing left. I'm asking you to do something kind with no strings on it, and I know that's not how your world works, but I had to ask someone, and everyone says you're the only man in this city who could actually pull it off. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. Outside the window, a container ship eased its way out of the harbor, slow and enormous, and completely indifferent to the 2 people standing frozen in a glass office above it. No, Jaewon said finally. Imani's stomach dropped. Please. I don't do weddings. I don't do love. It's not a service I provide. He turned back to his papers, a clear dismissal. Minho will show you out. She should have left. Every rational part of her said leave. You tried, you failed, go home and figure out something else. But Imani Reeves had spent her whole life being the person who didn't leave when things got hard, and something in her, grief maybe, or fury, or just the particular bravery of someone with absolutely nothing left to lose, kept her rooted to the floor. You don't believe in love, she said. It wasn't a question either. Fine. I'm not asking you to love her. I'm asking you to let her love, for once in her life, before it's too late for her to ever get the chance. That's not the same thing. You don't have to feel a single thing. Just be kind to her. Let her have a wedding day. Let her put on a dress and stand across from someone and say vows and feel, just once, like somebody chose her. That's all. And then, when it's over, her voice broke properly this time. When it's over, you never have to see either of us again. Jaewon didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than before, and something underneath the flatness of it made Imani look at him differently. Why does it matter so much to you, he asked, and not at all to her, that this happens? It matters to her too. She just doesn't have the strength left to fight for it herself, so I'm fighting for her instead. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at her the way a man looks at a puzzle he didn't expect to find interesting. I'll meet her, he said finally. Once. No promises beyond that. It wasn't a yes, but it was a door, cracked open 1/2 inch, and Imani walked out of that building for the first time in weeks, feeling something that was almost, like hope. Naomi, when Imani told her what she'd done, had laughed so hard she started coughing, and then cried, and then laughed again. You went to a mafia boss, she wheezed, and asked him to marry me? I panicked. It seemed logical at the time. Nothing about that sentence was logical, Imani. But her sister was smiling, really smiling, the old smile, the one that made strangers on the street smile back without knowing why. And Imani decided right then that whatever came of this, at least she'd made her sister laugh like that one more time. Jae-won-soo came to the flower shop on a Thursday evening after closing, alone, no bodyguards, dressed down in a plain grey sweater that made him look almost like an ordinary man. Imani had half expected him to cancel. She'd spent the whole day rearranging the same 3 buckets of ranunculus out of nerves. He stood in the doorway of Ruth's garden, looking faintly out of place among the peonies and the hanging ferns, and Naomi, thin now, a cannula tucked under her nose, wrapped in Grandma Ruth's old cardigan, looked up from the wheelchair Imani still hated seeing her in, and said, without a shred of the fear Imani had expected, "So you're the scary one my sister threatened into meeting me." Something flickered across Jae-won's face. Not quite a smile, but close. "I wasn't threatened," he said. "Bribed, then." "Intrigued," he corrected. Naomi's eyebrows lifted, delighted. "Oh, I like him already, Imani. He's got jokes." And that single, unguarded exchange was the beginning of something none of the 3 of them had a name for yet. Over the following 2 weeks, Jae-won came back. Not because Imani asked him to a second time. She never had to. He came on his own, sitting in the back room of the flower shop, while Naomi told him stories about their mother, about Grandma Ruth's stubbornness, about the ridiculous list of things she still wanted to do. He listened in a way Imani had never seen him do with anyone else. Really listened, without his phone in his hand, without that careful, closed-off stillness he wore like armor everywhere else. He brought Naomi things. Small, oddly perfect things. A snow globe from a shop he said he'd raided a rival's warehouse near once, years ago, and never forgotten. A recording of ocean waves on a little speaker. Since Paris and the real ocean aren't currently on the table, this is what I could manage. A single, absurdly expensive box of French pastries, flown in on ice, because item 2 on the list said croissant, even a bad one, and he'd apparently decided a bad one wasn't good enough. "You didn't have to do all this," Naomi told him once, holding the little speaker against her chest, like a child holding a favorite toy. "I know," Jae-won said. "I wanted to." And Imani, watching from the doorway with a lump rising in her throat, told herself the tightness in her chest was happiness for her sister. Just happiness. Nothing more complicated than that. She was lying to herself, and some small, honest part of her already knew it. "I want to ask you something here, because I think it matters for where this story is going. Do you think it's possible to fall for someone while you're watching them fall for someone you love? Let me know what you think down in the comments, because Imani's about to find out the hard way. Okay, before we keep going, if you're feeling this story the way I think you are, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need something to feel tonight. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment, because what happens between Jae-won and Imani in the next part is going to break your heart in the best possible way. Alright, let's get back to it. The wedding was set for 6 weeks out, as soon as Naomi's doctors said her heart could reasonably tolerate the stress of a full ceremony. Jae-won insisted on paying for everything, over Imani's protests, and Imani found herself spending long evenings at Seven Rivers offices anyway, going over flower arrangements and guest lists and seating charts with Minho, who turned out to have a genuinely excellent eye for centerpieces and an even better sense of humor once you got past the scar over his left eyebrow. "He's different around you too," Minho told her one evening, watching through the glass, as Jae-won helped Naomi try on veils in the next room, both of them laughing at something neither Imani nor Minho could hear. "I've worked for that man 11 years. Never seen him laugh like that. Not once. He's doing a good thing for my sister," Imani said carefully. "That's all it is." Minho gave her a long, knowing look that made her ears go hot. "If you say so." It wasn't that simple, and Imani knew it wasn't. In the quiet hours after midnight, when sleep wouldn't come, and she lay staring at her ceiling, replaying the small things. The way Jaewon's whole posture softened the second he walked into the flower shop, and how, more and more, some of that softening seemed to happen the moment his eyes landed on her, not Naomi. The way he'd started asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with the wedding, what she thought about a shipment delay, whether she'd read a particular book, what her favorite flower was, and why. Ranunculus, she'd told him. They look fragile, but they're one of the toughest flowers there is. They just don't advertise it. He'd gone very quiet after she said that, looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for yet. There was a night, 3 weeks before the wedding, when Naomi had gone to bed early, exhausted the way she was exhausted more and more often now, and Jaewon lingered in the shop's back room with Imani, while she swept up petals from the day's arrangements. "Can I ask you something?" he said, "and you don't have to answer." "Okay. Why flowers? Of all the things you could have done with your life." Imani leaned the broom against the counter, considering. "My grandmother used to say, grief needs somewhere to go. That if you give it flowers, it grows into something you can stand to look at." She smiled, a little sad. "I think I became a florist because I needed somewhere for all of it to go to. Mum, Dad leaving, now Naomi." She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What about you? Why the—" She gestured vaguely. "The empire, the fear, all of it. Doesn't seem like the kind of thing a person chooses for fun." Something shuttered behind his eyes, just briefly. "My mother," he said, "died when I was 12. Not gently. My father built something out of nothing to protect what was left of us, and when he died, it became mine to protect too. I didn't choose it, so much as inherit it." He paused. "I stopped believing love was something that lasted. Around the same time I inherited it. Seemed safer, fewer things to lose. And now—" He looked at her for a long moment, and the air in the small back room seemed to thicken. "Now I'm not so sure anymore," he said quietly, "which is a problem, considering the circumstances." Imani's heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. "What circumstances?" "I'm supposed to be falling for your sister," Jaewon said, low, almost like a confession dragged out of him against his will. "That was the arrangement, and I care for her, genuinely, more than I expected to. She's remarkable." He took a step closer, close enough that Imani had to tilt her head up to keep looking at him. "But it isn't her handwriting I've started recognizing on the flower orders. It isn't her laugh I catch myself listening for. I don't know what to do with that, Imani. I have never in my life not known what to do." Imani's whole body had gone very still. "You can't say that to me," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because in 3 weeks you're marrying my sister." "I know," Jaewon said, and the pain in his voice was real, raw, nothing like the careful stillness he wore for the rest of the world. "Believe me, I know exactly what I agreed to. I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I just needed to stop pretending I didn't feel it, even if it never goes anywhere, even if this is the only time I ever say it out loud." Neither of them moved. The shop was silent, except for the hum of the cooler where the wedding flowers waited, and for one long, unbearable moment, Imani let herself imagine, just imagine, a version of this story where the arithmetic of loyalty and love and grief added up differently. Then she stepped back. "We can't," she said. "She needs this. She needs you. I won't let anything, including this, including me, take that away from her. Not now. Not when there's so little time left." Jaewon nodded slowly, jaw tight, and something that looked almost like respect moved across his face beneath the hurt. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're right. She comes first." They never spoke of it again, but it sat between them after that, unspoken and enormous, every single time they were in a room together. Naomi's decline, when it came fast. It was 10 days before the wedding, when she collapsed in the middle of choosing which shade of white her dress should be, laughing 1 second about how there were apparently 40 different names for the same color, and on the floor of the bridal shop the next. Imani screaming for someone to call an ambulance, while Jaewon, who'd insisted on coming along, who by now went almost everywhere Naomi did, scooped her up himself and carried her to the car because he said he wasn't going to wait for an ambulance that might take 10 minutes they didn't have. The hospital kept her for 4 days. Her heart, Dr. Alvarez said gently, gripping Imani's hand across the little plastic chairs of the ICU family room, was failing faster than the models had predicted. Weeks, now, not months. "I want the wedding moved up," Naomi said, the moment she was lucid enough to talk, tubes still taped to the back of her hand. "I don't care if it's in this room. I don't care if I'm in a hospital gown instead of a dress. Imani, Jaewon, please." They moved the wedding to 5 days out. Imani spent every waking hour turning the hospital's small chapel into something that looked less like a hospital and more like a garden, armfuls of white ranunculus, because Naomi had asked for Imani's flower, not just some generic wedding flower, strung fairy lights that Minho climbed a ladder to hang himself, a borrowed harpist, because Naomi said she wanted actual music, not a phone speaker, for this one. Jaewon didn't leave the hospital for 3 straight nights. Imani watched him sit at Naomi's bedside, reading to her from a battered paperback, watched him hold her hand while nurses adjusted monitors, watched a man the entire underworld feared gently smooth a blanket over a dying woman's feet because she said they were cold. Whatever complicated, unfinished thing lived between him and Imani, she never doubted, not for 1 second in those final days, that his tenderness toward Naomi was real. 2 days before the wedding, at nearly midnight, Naomi asked Imani to help her sit up in bed. Her voice had gone thin, but her eyes were clear, clearer than they'd been in weeks. "I need to tell you something," Naomi said, "and I need you to actually listen, instead of arguing with me, for once in your stubborn life." Imani laughed wetly and gripped her sister's hand. "Okay, I know," Naomi said softly, "about you and Jaewon." Imani's whole body went cold. "Naomi, don't you dare apologize to me." Naomi's grip tightened, surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "I've watched the way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's paying attention. I've watched the way you look back and then make yourself stop. I'm dying, Imani, not blind." Her eyes filled, but she was smiling, that same unguarded smile that had made strangers on the street love her without knowing why. "I got what I wanted. He gave me a version of love I never thought I'd get to have. Gentle and real, and mine, even if it was borrowed time. I'm not angry that his heart wandered somewhere else, while mine was busy failing. I'm grateful. Do you understand me? I am grateful." "Naomi, please." "When I'm gone," Naomi pressed on, tears sliding freely now, "I don't want you spending whatever life you have left, punishing yourself for feeling something real. Promise me you won't let guilt steal the one good thing that came out of all of this." Imani couldn't speak. She only nodded, sobbing, holding her sister's hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Naomi Reeves died the next morning, quietly, in her sleep, 1 day before her wedding. If this story has you in your feelings right now, and I have a feeling it does, let me know in the comments how you're holding up. Seriously, I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, ones that don't shy away from the hard, beautiful parts of love and loss, subscribe, because we're not quite done yet. There's still an ending to get to. Grief, Imani discovered, was not the clean, quiet thing Grandma Ruth's sayings had made it sound like. It was loud. It knocked things over. It made her furious at people who didn't deserve it, and unable to speak to people who did. She barely spoke to Jaewon at the funeral. She said nothing at all, when he had an entire section of the cemetery planted with ranunculus at his own expense, a whole hillside of them, blooming absurdly, defiantly, in a place built for mourning. She let Minho drive her home afterward instead of him, and when Jaewon called, she let it ring out. When he came to the flower shop, she locked the door and stood behind the counter with her back to the window, until she heard his footsteps retreat. It wasn't fair, and some clear-eyed part of her knew it wasn't fair, even as she did it. But grief doesn't consult fairness. It consults the rawest, most wounded part of a person, and that part of Imani had decided, somewhere in the wreckage of losing her sister one single day before a wedding, meant to give her one good thing, that loving Jaewon-suk, allowing herself to love him, would mean the whole unbearable arrangement had been about her all along, instead of Naomi. It would mean betraying the one promise she'd made her sister her entire life. Naomi comes first. Even though Naomi herself, with her last clear breath, had told her the opposite. 3 weeks after the funeral, Jaewon showed up at the shop one final time, at closing, the same way he had the very first evening he'd met Naomi. Imani almost didn't let him in. She did, in the end, because some exhausted, honest part of her knew this conversation had been circling both of them for weeks, and running from it wasn't grief anymore. It was cowardice. "I'm not here to push you into anything," Jaewon said, standing just inside the door, hands loosely at his sides, none of the careful stillness he wore everywhere else. "I came to say something, and then I'll go, and I won't come back unless you ask me to." Imani said nothing. Her arms were crossed, a wall she'd built out of exhaustion and grief and fear. "I loved your sister," he said. "Not the way I love you, but I loved her. She gave me something I didn't know I still had the capacity for, which was hope that gentleness still meant something in a world I'd spent my whole adult life making harder. I will grieve her the rest of my days, and I'm not asking you to compete with that, or replace it, or forgive me for feeling two different kinds of love inside the same broken timeline. I'm just telling you the truth, because she asked me to. The last time I saw her, she made me promise the same thing she apparently made you promise. That I wouldn't let this end in silence." Imani's arms slowly uncrossed. Her eyes were wet. "She told you that too." "She said," Jaewon said, his voice cracking for the first time Imani had ever heard, "Don't waste the time I don't get to have." He swallowed. "I've spent 11 years building something so nobody could touch me. I let your sister in because I thought it was safe. A kindness, with an end date. Nothing that could actually cost me anything. I didn't expect either of you to matter this much. I didn't expect to still be standing in a flower shop 3 weeks after a funeral, terrified for the first time in my adult life, because the person I want more than anything won't look at me. Quick question before we get to the end. Do you think Imani should let him in? Or is it too soon, too complicated, too much? I want to know what you'd do in her shoes. Comment below, and stick with me, because we're almost there." Imani finally looked up at him, tears streaking freely down her face now. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words tearing out of her raw. "If I love you, it means all of this. The arrangement, the wedding, everything we built for her. It means it was never just for her. It means some part of me wanted this for myself the whole time, and I don't know how to live with that." "It can be both," Jaewon said softly, closing the distance between them at last. "You gave your sister something real. That doesn't get erased because something real also grew in you. At the same time, in the same soil. Your grandmother told you grief needs somewhere to go, so it can become something you can look at." He reached out, gently, and brushed a tear from her cheek, the first time he had ever touched her. "Maybe love needs the same thing. Maybe it's allowed to grow in the same cracked, complicated ground as grief. Maybe that doesn't make it any less real." Imani let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 weeks. "She told me not to let guilt steal the one good thing that came out of all this." "Then don't," Jaewon said. "Let me stay. Not to replace anything, just to stay." It took time. Grief doesn't hand you back your life on a schedule, and Imani and Jaewon never pretended it did. There were weeks that year when she couldn't say Naomi's name without her voice breaking, when Jaewon would simply sit with her in the quiet, instead of trying to fix it, because some things aren't meant to be fixed, only witnessed. But slowly, the way ranunculus pushes up through cold ground in early spring, fragile-looking, deceptively tough, Something steady grew between them. A year to the day after Naomi's funeral, Jaewon planted an entire new bed of ranunculus along the side of Ruth's garden, right where the front window caught the morning light, and asked Imani, on his knees in the dirt with soil still under his fingernails, if she would let him spend the rest of his life making sure she never had to fight the world alone again. She said yes in the same shop where she had once threatened, then begged, then finally loved a man everyone in the city was afraid of, everyone except her sister, who'd seen exactly who he really was from the very first evening, sitting in a wheelchair with a cannula under her nose, delighted that the scary one had jokes. They were married the following spring, in the same hospital chapel, filled again with white ranunculus and fairy lights, with Minho standing up as best man and Grandma Ruth's old cardigan draped, deliberately, over an empty chair in the front row. Imani kept the flower shop. She named a new hybrid ranunculus variety, the one she and Grandma Ruth spent 2 years crossbreeding for its unusually deep, defiant red, after her sister, the Naomi. People still buy it by the armful, not knowing the story behind it, just knowing, somehow, without being told, that it means something. And that's the story of Imani, Naomi, and Jaewon, of a wish that came true in a way none of them expected, and a love that grew in the cracked, complicated ground grief leaves behind. If this one hit you the way I think it did, please, like this video, subscribe if you're not already part of the family here, and leave a comment telling me which part broke your heart the most. Was it Naomi's list? The wedding that almost didn't happen? That final conversation in the flower shop? I read every single comment, and honestly, hearing from you is my favorite part of making these. And if you're new here, welcome. We tell stories like this one every week. Stories about love that isn't easy, isn't simple, but is real. So stick around, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.